I started doing what I'm doing back in, say, probably 1985, because I realized that one of the pathways to totalitarian catastrophe was deceit at the individual level. This is something that Solzhenitsyn made very much of, Orwell as well, Huxley as well. These great thinkers concluded in the aftermath of these totalitarian catastrophes that there was an integral link between pathology at the individual level, which was fundamentally the willingness to use deceit in an instrumental manner. I'll lie to you to get what I want, and authoritarian catastrophe, and that it was a direct causal link. And I actually buy that argument. I think that's literally true. And so partly what I'm doing, I hope, is helping people walk through thinking about why telling the truth is a good idea. Not only for them, not as a top-down, shake your finger moral injunction, don't lie, you shouldn't lie, but in a detailed manner to explain the relationship between the instrumental use of deceit and the collapse of civilizations. And that connection is way closer than people think. So one person influences 1,000 people, for sure, in their lifetime, and sometimes a lot more than that, and 1,000, the next rung out from that, 1,000 times 1,000 is 1,000,000, and the next rung out from that is 1,000,000,000. And so you're always at the center of a concentric circle that 2 rungs out contains 1,000,000,000 people. Well, it turns out that what you do matters. And basically what I'm doing, I hope, is touring and talking to people face to face in these lectures, for example, and making the case that it's a terrifying case. Everyone says, well, we want meaning in our life. Do you now? Do you now? Because you might ask yourself, what's the more threatening possibility? That nothing you do matters, which means you can pretty much do whatever you want. That's the upside of that nihilistic claim, no responsibility, right? And why not pursue narrow-focused hedonism, since nothing matters anyways? So that's the shadow of nihilism. Or everything you do matters. And it's a lot more terrifying to contemplate that, is that you will be held accountable for everything you do. And I believe that firmly, partly as a consequence of my clinical experience. I never saw any one of my clinical clients ever get away with anything, even once. And you think, well, people get away with things all the time. It's like, no, they don't. They might gain a narrow advantage in one dimension in the short term. But, let's say that you use deceit in your business practices. First of all, that doesn't work very well because people will figure you out. So as a long-term strategy, right. It's terrible. Yep. It just doesn't work. Yep. No one is going to play with you if you're a cheat. But let's say that someone asked me the other day, well, what about these dictators that ruled their whole life, and they were at the top of the hierarchy, let's say, and they had all the power. Stalin's a perfectly good example. It's like, didn't he win? Well, everyone Stalin ever talked to lied to him because they were absolutely bloody terrified of him. His country was a nightmare. It was a hell, or as close as we've been able to produce, with the possible exception of the Nazis and the Maoists, but it was up there in terms of hell. And did he rule? Yes, but he ruled hell. And if you think that's a victory, well, go ahead and try it and see how much of a victory it is. Milton Satan said, I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. It's like, fair enough, go ahead. Use deceit, use instrumentality, rule in hell. You'll be the ruler. See how much good it does you. See where that takes you. It takes you somewhere terrible. For the first time in my life, really, I believe this to be the case, conservatives really have something to sell to young people. And they can sell the meaning of responsibility, because young people are bereft of meaning, and most people find meaning in responsibility. And when the right talks about responsibility, they kind of do it in that finger-wagging way that makes conservatives unpopular among young people. You should be responsible. It's like, yeah, you should. Why? Well, because your life is chaotic and meaningless, and you're stuck in this juvenile surreality, and it's really painful for you, and you're anxious and aimless and goalless. And then you look at people who have a life, because maybe you could have a life, and you think, well, what does that life consist of? It's like, well, you have a committed, intimate relationship. There's one. You have friends that you're honest with and playful with. So you have a group of friends. You have a job or a career. You know, you learn how to use your life, your time outside of work in a productive, engaging way. You regulate your susceptibility to the multitude of hedonistic temptations that are in front of you. You pay some attention to your mental and physical health. You make a goal, some goals for the future that are concrete. Well, there's 7 things you can do. They're all responsible things. Why? Because then your life will have some meaning. Now, you might say, well, what's the ultimate meaning? It's like, get those things straight first. They're not nothing. And maybe you won't be so damn miserable and bitter and resentful and angry and aimless and anxious and frustrated and disappointed and then ashamed if you had 5 of those 7 things going well.
And the psychoanalysts, I think, err too much on the side of the subject. They tend to think that too much of you is inside of you and too little of you is outside of you. And part of the reason I believe that is because of my clinical experience. I love the psychoanalysts, man. They're brilliant, they're deep. They grapple with real problems, like with the problems. When people have real problems, and I mean profound problems, they're really profound moral problems. They're problems of good and evil, really. You know, there are things going on in their family that are so terrible that, well, that they're sometimes fatal. You know, lie upon lie upon lie upon lie for decades and decades and decades. It's awful. And that's not exactly inside them. It's out there in the world. And lots of the people that I see, very famous critic of psychology, criticized the practice of psychology quite effectively I believe in the early 60s. And he basically said, most people have problems in living, they don't have psychological problems. And so I've experienced, despite my love for the psychoanalysts, very frequently what I'm doing as a therapist is helping people have a life that would work. You know, and you can parameterize that. It's like, what do you need? How about some friends? That people kind of like that. How about an intimate relationship with someone that you can trust, that maybe has a future? That'd be good. How about a career that puts you in a dominance hierarchy somewhere, so at least you've got some possibility of rising, some possibility of stabilizing yourself, and a schedule and a routine, because no one can live without a routine. You just forget that. If you guys don't have a routine, I would recommend, like, you get one going, because you cannot be mentally healthy without a routine. You need to pick a time to get up. Whatever time you want, but pick one and stick to it, because otherwise you dysregulate your circadian rhythms and they regulate your mood. And eat something in the morning. So, a schedule, that's a good thing, man. Your brain will thank you for it. It will stabilize your nervous system. With a bit of a plan, that's a good thing. You need a career, you need something productive to do with your time. You need to regulate your use of drugs and alcohol, most particularly alcohol, because that does in a lot of people. You need a family, like the family you have, your parents and all that. It'd be nice if you all got along, you could work on that. That's a good thing to work on. And then, you know, you probably need children at some point. And that's life. That's what life is. And if you're missing, you know, you may have a good reason to not be operating on one of those dimensions. It's not mandatory. But I can tell you that if you're not operating reasonably well on 4, I think I mentioned 6, if you're not operating reasonably well on at least 3 of them, there's no way you're going to be psychologically thriving. And that's more pragmatic in some sense than psychological, right? Human beings have a nature. There's things we need. And if we have them, well, that's good. And if we don't have them, well, then we feel the lack. And so behavioral psychologists concentrate a lot more on that sort of thing. You know, it's practical. It's like strategizing. Make a career plan. Figure out how to negotiate, because that's bloody important. Figure out how to say what you need. Figure out how to tell the truth to people. Figure out how to listen to your partner in particular, because if you listen to them, they will actually tell you what they want. And sometimes you can give it to them, and maybe they'll return the favor. And if you practice that for like 15 years, Well, then maybe you're constantly giving each other what you want. Well, hooray, that would be good. And then there's two of you under both circumstances, and it's better to have two brains than one, because people think differently because of their temperament mostly. And so the negotiation is where the wisdom arises, and it's part of the transformation, the psychological transformation that's attendant on an intimate relationship, and one of the fundamental purposes of a long-term intimate relationship.